again, and they completely believe us. And they have still to this day just been 100% supportive of my sister and I. My parents called around to local agencies of how to do this without getting the police involved, and eventually came to the conclusion that they weren't going to get him help. We did not want him to do this again to somebody else. So we were taken to a place called the Children's Advocacy Center of Northwest Cook County, just outside Chicago, Illinois. And it was because of that place that has got me flying all over the country, finding my voice, and allowed me to break my silence. Because it was there I walked in with this fear and anticipation, no one's going to believe me. That these people are going to look at me and question me. Well, why didn't you speak up after the first time this happened? And why did you allow it to go on? All these racing thoughts going through my head. But I got a completely different message. I was interviewed there by a forensic interviewer. Through a two-way mirror, a detective sat on the other side listening as my sister and I shared our stories at different times, taking them through the horror of what I went on through nearly 2 years of my Thanksgivings, my Christmases, being locked in my aunt's bedroom, in their closet, in their bathroom, basement, you name it. If he could get his hands on me, he got his hands on me. I mean, there was one time his parents were driving us home from Christmas, and there was no room in the car. They had 4 boys, there was 3 sisters. My parents would go home early to put all the Christmas presents out, because in our family, we celebrated Christmas Eve opening our gifts when we got home from our Christmas celebrations. So I was stuck with nowhere to sit, and of course Brian was the first one to offer, oh, she could sit on my lap. So for the entire half-an-hour drive home, he sat there and continued to abuse me while his parents are just in front of us in the car. And it was through my experience at the Children's Advocacy Center, speaking out and sharing my voice, I got the message that they believed me, that they were going to hold my cousin accountable, and that I had nothing to fear. And it was like this heavy burden that I'd been holding on to my entire life had been lifted off my shoulders. At the same time, I was still keeping that one little piece of my life locked away, because it wasn't haunting me. My cousin I was seeing constantly, being haunted with nightmares and flashbacks, where with this man Richard, my friend's uncle, I had moved on. I was younger then, you might want to call it, I repressed it, but I never forgot about it. It was always there, but it just kind of left it, didn't haunt me, so I felt it wasn't important to bring it up and hurt my family anymore, realizing that this did not happen once but twice. Once again, by 2 people I knew, not that stranger danger that I had been warned about over and over again. My cousin was called into the police department 2 days later, and after 3 hours of being interrogated, confessed. And I praise that detective to this day for getting a confession out of him. And I'll never forget it, because the last question I was asked during my interview at the Children's Advocacy Center was, what do you want to see happen to your cousin? And even at 13 years old, after all the horror and evil I saw in him, I said, I want him to get help. I want him to get counseling so he will never hurt someone the way he hurt my sister and I. There was never revenge in me. There was never this wanting him to be locked away, because my idea was I did not want him to someday perpetrate and hurt somebody else. As time went on, we were put in a group with the Children's Advocacy Center, and I was able to connect with other people, other girls my age, who had experienced similar situation. Because with my other friends, they didn't understand. They listened, but they didn't understand the horrors I went through. Through the CAC, I was able to connect with other girls my age who were experiencing the same things I was. But I was still too ashamed to talk about the details, because it was such a dirty, hush-hush topic. I eventually, my parents eventually, because they were harboring so much anger and pain of, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, why didn't she see this, as she questioned herself? And as I tell any parent, you can't blame yourself. You can't protect your kids of everything. You can't see everything. I mean, you can't keep them locked up from society. And you think you can trust family members. You think you can trust family friends. But this does happen. And like they say the statistics, 80 to 90% of the time, it's someone you love and trust. It's not that stranger danger. My parents were involved in a group, the Children's Advocacy Center, with other parents who were experiencing the same feelings that they had gone through. And it really helped them in their own healing of taking away the blame and guilt that they had carried and realizing the only person that we should be blaming is the one that did this to us. You're probably wondering how the rest of my family reacted as this came out and family members started hearing our cousin did this. Believe it or not, even after a confession. My dad, coming from a family of 7 brothers and sisters, grandparents who loved and adored us, completely supported my cousin, even after a confession. Never called up once to ask and see how my sister and I were doing. Never offered any support, and started making up excuses for him. Oh, he's just a teenage boy. Oh, police forced him into a confession. He didn't do this. The girls are lying. They're making this up. Their mother brainwashed them. Story after story after story. And it was heartbreaking, but I didn't want my cousin's actions to keep me away from my other little cousins, my relationships with other relatives. So for a year, we stayed away from the family, began our own healing. And about a year and a half later, my cousin sat down and was pretty much forced into apologizing to my sister and I, with his parents and my parents present. To this day, I can't tell you if he truly meant it, or if it was just to get us to go the next day to my grandfather's 70th birthday party surprise. I don't know if it was all put on, and I still wonder that to this day, but I just told him, because I still don't have the courage and I'm still afraid of him, I just hope he learns from what he did and he'll never do it again. My real confrontation would come 3 years later. As I was in high school, for years, freshman, sophomore, junior year of high school, I was suffering through nightmares, flashbacks that were haunting me constantly. 16 years old, I couldn't take it anymore. I thought this was going to follow me the rest of my life. I wasn't going to be able to be in relationships. And so I decided life wasn't worth living, and overdosed on a bunch of pills and tried killing myself. Didn't work, thank God. But found a new habit after that, self-injury. I'd rather cut my wrists to snap me back into reality, because the physical pain was far more bearable than the emotional pain that I had been through. And eventually the school psychologist found out about it, came to me, told me, you're harmed yourself, I have to break confidentiality and tell your mother. My mother worked in my high school, so within the next hour she knew what was going on. They had me set up seeing a therapist outside of school. I was put on antidepressants, sleep medication, all sorts of things, just so I can get through every single day. All because of the actions of somebody else. And I realized by my junior year of high school, I could continue to hurt myself the way I was. I could continue to let this haunt me the way it was. But I'm in control of my own happiness. I could spend the rest of my life miserable, hating my cousin, letting his actions rob another piece of my life, or I can do something about it. So I decided, instead of pouring all this pain and feeling I had out to therapists, trying to make my parents understand, I decided I needed to confront this monster, and I did just that. I confronted him in a letter, telling him how his actions affected my life, filling it with so much anger and hatred, and telling him it was a very, very, very harsh letter. A letter I share in my first book called Stolen Innocence. To my surprise, he responded back. And for 7 months, we went back and forth, corresponding in letters, trying to get answers, looking for anything to show me why he did this. Yet I knew anything he said would never really make sense to understand why he would do something so evil and perverted. But I found something else by confronting my cousin. It led me 7 months later to a place in my life where he wrote me a letter apologizing, asking for my forgiveness, telling me that he takes with him the rest of his life the actions he placed on my life, and feels like he really messed up my life and his own, and hopes that someday I can move on with my life and not be affected by his actions. It was like that light bulb moment. I was realizing I was still letting him have all this control and power, the anger that consumed me, take over my life. So I decided, you know what? I have to forgive for myself. I can't let this man take any more of my joy and happiness. I can't harbor all this anger and hatred that was pent up inside of me.